I could make up a little system and pretend how to use it, but the fastest way to learn a language is to use what works. It's been demonstrated through the work of Professor Stephen Krashen and many others that lists of vocabulary and grammar rules are not the most effective way for a human to learn a foreign language. And in fact, humans don't learn foreign languages, they acquire them. The key idea here is, of course, to use comprehensible input, and that's material which you understand most of what you're watching, reading, or listening to, because you understand the words and phrases that are involved, and any new words and phrases you can pick up them naturally because you understand everything else going on. So your level of comprehension is already relatively high. And if you're a complete beginner, using pictures, hand gestures, even noises can also help you to understand the message. And your brain, which is essentially a pattern recognition machine, will just start to pick up the language without us having to force it. And so in order to learn quicker, we have to do two things. One, only use material that uses comprehensible input. And two, get as much input as you possibly can. Both of these will look different for different people, but I will explain them so you start to understand how to use them for yourself. People talk about trying to learn the most frequent words in a language in order to give them a head start, and personally, I don't think this works that well. Let me explain. If you memorize the top 100 words in any language, so I, you, and, because, you will know the most frequent words, but it won't be as helpful because these aren't the sorts of words that we need in order to have an interesting conversation. They're not the subject of the conversation. And because they're the most frequent words, we don't have to try and learn them because we're going to see them in every book or every story, every YouTube video we watch. We're going to see them all the time. Instead of having to force it by remembering these words and then translating them in our head, if we use comprehensible input material, we can pick up the same words, but hopefully have a much more enjoyable time when we do it. Our recollection of them will be better too, because we will have acquired them in the same way that we did as a child. We won't be struggling to remember the translation because we need huge amounts of input, and that will help to reinforce any word that we've acquired. Now this will look different for everybody, and eventually you can just start to consume content that you would do normally in English and naturally pick up the language that way. But what would you do if you're a beginner? To use this method, start by going on YouTube and looking up your target language and then TPRS, or Comprehensible Input, or ALG, which stands for Automatic Language Growth. And you'll find tons of input these days for all the major languages. If you're going to learn a target language that's a bit more out there, like Fuljonese, for example, personally what I would do is go to italki, find a teacher and use a method I spoke about previously called crosstalk, where I speak in English and the other speaker speaks in my target language. And in those lessons you can use drawings or hand gestures, noises, in order to start to acquire that language. This is what I've been doing in Spanish, and I can have conversations with native speakers, although I can't tell you any grammar rules in Spanish, but I can understand most things when people talk to me directly. You can also start by reading if you want, and starting with the classic, very simple dialogues, but the more and more you read material, you acquire new words and you pick up the language that way. There are things called graded readers, which are books aimed at adult learners of that language. So instead of having to try and read children's books, or you can use a website like Link, L-I-N-G-Q, where you can also find some material for learning if you want to use that instead of trying to watch videos online. The key thing though is that we try and use material that is relatively easy. We have high comprehension of it. Otherwise you spend the entire time just looking up translations. I spoke about this in another video where I explained the importance of keeping it easy in order to progress quicker. So, the best advice with regards to time is to count hours, not years. If you have been learning French for 2 years, but you only listen to one podcast a week, then over that 2-year period, that isn't really a huge amount of time. But let's say you listen to the same podcast and their back catalogue every day, and let's say your commute in total is about an hour and a half, and maybe you get half an hour for lunch. Well, that's 2 hours of listening potentially. In 1 month, you could have listened to more hours of French than the previous 2 years combined. Really? Yeah. Wow. Let that sink in, because that's really important. In 1 month of consistent daily input, you can get more input than the previous 2 years of dabbling combined. Then as you get used to the language, you can have it in the background when you're cooking, when you're getting ready for work. You can do this by playing content from YouTube and just watching or listening to stuff which you would normally do in your target language. The key thing is though, if you want to keep making progress, it should be comprehensible to you, i.e. fairly easy to understand. You understand most of what's being said. That way you're going to pick up new words in context instead of struggling and just about understanding the meaning. If speed is important to you, then actually you need to try and use as much easy stuff as possible. And over time, your perception of what's easy will change. This broadly follows the ideas of automatic language growth, where we just naturally acquire the words because of context alone. If, like me, you don't need to learn in the fastest period of time possible, then sometimes it is nice to just put on some stuff you find interesting enough. Maybe you don't understand everything, but it keeps you motivated to come back and stay with your target language, and you still get some exposure to it as well. It's not as efficient because I don't understand enough of it in order to pick up new words or phrases or grammar. I'm just trying to pick out the words that I already know in order to follow along. And if you have more time and can add more hours of input a day, then go on somewhere like italki, link below, and you can find a teacher who talks about comprehensible input. Sometimes people mention TPRS. Message a teacher first and explain what you want in a lesson. And if you want to save money, you can just find a language exchange partner and chat with them online for free. The key thing is getting meaningful hours of input, doing things that you know will work. I don't use any apps or flashcards or other hacks. The research is quite clear. We just need to use huge amounts of comprehensible input. And the best thing about this method is it improves your comprehension. So you're not left talking to a native speaker and you've got no idea what they just said because you hadn't had enough input. Something which I use, which I find motivating, is to track the amount of input I get every day. I'm currently using Dreaming Spanish, which does that for me automatically, and I can add some extra stuff if I watch anything outside of the platform. I only record material that I have found comprehensible though, because if it hasn't been a high enough level of understanding for me, I can't guarantee its effectiveness. If time is important to you and you want to acquire a language naturally, then check out this video here where I explain a bit more about this approach and how it's meant that after years of struggle, I could finally start to acquire a foreign language. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.